I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Domann, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset.
All right, well, let's get started. On Pro Mindset today, we have a special edition. This is a Black Lives Matter edition. We're going to talk to two young black men, Greg Scruggs, defensive line coach, University of Cincinnati, former NFL player, former client, and Michael Lehan, who's a assistant superintendent in the city of Minneapolis for the fifth largest school district in the state of Minnesota, and former NFL player, former client. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's get started. Let's jump to Mike first. Michael, you live in Minneapolis. You grew up in Minneapolis. You went to college at the U. You went away for 7 or 8 years to experience your NFL journey, and now you're back in the school system in a position of leadership. Go back to when you were a young man. Share with our audience a situation where you were wronged, you were unfairly treated by the police or by people of authority.
Just to kind of give a geographical backdrop, where I grew up here in Minnesota was about 15, 20 minutes outside of Minneapolis and in the city of Hopkins. And during my time when I graduated high school, there was not many people that looked like me. And certainly I can think of one teacher that I had who was not even my teacher, just me knowing during my K-12 experience in Hopkins that looked like me, that was a person of color. But as far as your question around the experience that I had, there's a couple of experiences that stand out to me. One of which is I am a product of interracial adoption, meaning that obviously being a black male is adopted by a white family. And there was a time in which I had hair on top of my head and which required me to get it cut periodically. And so at that time we went to cough cutters, went in the store, and even walked back to the chair. And as I was sitting in the chair, there seemed to be a lot of discussion behind me and people kind of looking over, pointing, and so forth. And then the person who was the stylist came back and had the manager with them and said, you know, we don't cut this type of hair in this store. And so as we think about microaggressions or just scars that happen due to people not being conscious or unaware of the impact of a scenario, here I am 40 years old and still think about a time very clearly when I was roughly, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, about a time that I felt othered or wronged or cast aside. The other time was we had something called the Raspberry Festival in downtown Hopkins. And I remember being there with my brother, and there was a white guy that just started yelling at us that said, "Go back to Africa, go back to Africa." And, at that time, again, relatively young, not really knowing, what that meant. And, why am I being singled out and, coming to the understanding that due to the color of my skin, that I'm less than, that I don't belong. So those are two experiences that really come to mind as we think about just being othered or being isolated as a result of the color of my skin.
Okay. Greg, your turn.
Yeah, I think, as I listen to Michael speak, I think it's, blatantly obvious that this is real, right? He didn't make that up. Obviously, a traumatizing situation that's been bothering him for quite some time and probably will continue to bother him. It's just indicative that this stuff is real. Racism, prejudice, discrimination is real. And so for me, it started when I was the first time that I knew or felt racism was when I was 7 years old, playing outside. This one child on the street was upset and had dropped the N-bomb with a hard ER. Now, mind you, I'm 6 or 7. My whole family had been listening to hip-hop, rap music, unedited. So it's not like I hadn't heard it before. And I had been around people who had used the term in our own community, but I had never heard it with such hate. and the heart. And at the time, I didn't process it, but now I can look back on it and realize that she was a direct product of their parents. So that's the first time that I got caught. And then the mom came marching down the street and said, use it with the same type of anger and hurt right in front of our house in the middle of the street in a predominantly black neighborhood. And so from that point on, I realized that this was real. And so you get that at 7 years old, all fast forward all the way to a few weeks ago, where I was in a parking lot of a store in the middle of a state I won't name, just for protection state, to protect people, but in the parking lot. Now, this area was a predominantly white area. I get it, I'm well aware, and I had to pull over to take a call. So I parked in the back of the parking lot, but not so far away that it was out of place or out of touch. And I got out, and I had doors open on my car, and I was walking around doing something. And up strolls a sheriff just to come check me out. Drove slowly past my car, kept going, stopped a little bit, took back around, drove back past my car, slowly peeking in, peering in, and then drove off. Didn't patrol the lot, didn't do anything, whatever. Now, to the average person, they say, well, you don't know what that would have been. You don't know what that could have been. But to any person who says that to me, I can make the argument on anything that you're going to tell me. Well, he might have got a call about a suspicious vehicle. Well, why is this vehicle suspicious? It's a white vehicle with no tinted windows in a parking lot of a pretty large box store with several other vehicles. Why is that vehicle suspicious? There's nothing about it. It's got stock rims. Nothing suspicious about it. There's only one thing that could make that vehicle suspicious. I don't have a flag. I don't have a tag. I don't have anything hanging off my. There's only one thing that could make that vehicle suspicious. Or maybe he was just checking out the area. Well, if he was just checking out the area, why did he go stroll up and down each aisle of the box store? And so we don't have enough time on the podcast, Craig, for me to give you every experience. And there have been traumatic experiences that they've happened when I was younger. It took me being older to understand how those experiences affected me or what was occurring during those experiences. So that was the first moment at 7 years old that I realized that racism was real and prejudice, I should say, that was racism. But prejudice, which is what the other incident was, still exists to this day.
Well, Greg, let's move into the NFL world, and let's jump to Mike real quick. Michael, when you were playing with the Saints and the Dolphins and the Browns, did you ever experience an episode of unfairness, oppression, mistreatment, suspicion?
I can't necessarily speak to something really overtly in the league, but one thing that I think about is just that terminology of owners, right? You think about owners of NFL teams and the owners, and with a industry that's predominantly people of color and certainly black males, and to use the terminology owners. And then you have a combine, which essentially is measuring every single piece of a human and ranking them. And then you, as a player, you have a ranking, and then you go to teams, and you're more of a position than you are of a individual entity. So really, what I'm suggesting is just the whole process of being a player is dehumanizing, and that's not. And I don't want to suggest that every owner or every general manager is racist or that a coach is racist and they don't value their players. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. But as you think about the NFL as a process, as an organization, from the combine and ranking and value, stratifies humans, and by doing so, inherently, it creates a taxonomy of less than.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, the NFL treats players like a piece of meat, and they can cut you guys anytime you want. And both you guys have been cut multiple times, and I'm guessing that was a little bit dehumanizing as well, because just the process of waiving a player is very depersonalized.
Mm-hmm. The process of being cut with no repercussion to the team whatsoever is what's probably the most dehumanizing factor, because here we are. And again, this spans, this is the Black Lives Matter edition, but this spans across black, white, blue, green, whoever puts on that jersey. And just speaking to the idea as a whole that Lehan was talking about, that the fact that we have to go home to families, moms, dads, kids, brothers, sister. I mean, being released one time, it was a roster move just for the weekend because I was injured. And I had flown my brothers out for that game. But I didn't even have access to the facility Saturday morning. And then I was signed back Monday. And there's nothing that goes on with the team. So I think that's the dehumanizing kind of factor amongst many others, that really bothers me.
Talk more about what Greg is saying is that dehumanizing, what people don't realize is that inherently people of color, black people, they carry a high level of trauma. So even though cutting somebody might be part of the process, it just exacerbates the trauma that is already inherently conditioned to people of color because they've been historically cast aside, told that they're less than, with no concern and repercussions as what Greg just alluded to. So then there's that trauma piece, but then there's no infrastructure to support that level of trauma of being cast aside and being told that, yep, you didn't make the cut. It's a roster move. Even being inactive on game day. Yeah, you're on the roster, you make a paycheck, but that in itself is how trauma emerges. And then you look at how successful people are once they exit the NFL, and it's tough. It is absolutely tough. And so I'm wondering how just the experience of being an NFL player for players of colors does more harm than good, just because it is a continuation of the culture, our society that has cast aside people of color over time.
The black man that was shot at Wendy's here in the last couple of weeks,
Rayshard Brooks.
Mr. Brooks acted in such a way that is consistent with what Michael just described. Someone that has had trauma, wakes up from a nap, might have had a beer, sees a cop, and all of a sudden, instead of them saying, hey, bro, go get an Uber and come back, get your car tomorrow, probably shouldn't drive. Next thing you know, he's acting in a way that he's been traumatized, and he almost acts like he has no option. So he grabs the taser, he does crazy stuff, but it's consistent with how you act when you're backed into a corner. You don't think you have any other option.
Yes. And I think that is what's missed about amongst a lot of this stuff. What's missed is the trauma that is more deeply rooted than just any one-off incident, right? This is trauma that dates years and years and years. And from the onset, right, literally from the onset of our people, our ancestors being on this land. And so that trauma is led to submission. That trauma is why there was, I won't even say an acceptance, but why there wasn't even more rebellion to oppression and suppression. It's because the fear of the repercussions and consequences have led to such. And so when there begins to be segregation, or when there begins to be prejudice, or when there begins to be discrimination, you have some people who stand up and say, you know what, this ain't right. I don't care what you say. We will burn this place down until we get whatever we want. But that is the minority in some aspects, in my opinion. The majority say, listen, be fearful of the consequences and repercussions that are a direct result of people trying to suppress and oppress you, because we did not have the means, the way, the power, if you will, to ever fight back. And so when you see something like what happened with Rayshard Brooks, all that is the fear of now, this trauma-induced fear of saying one too many times, I have seen this. And I know that if I sit myself here, allow myself to come at the hands of these men, something bad may happen. That's what people miss. It's not that everybody's labeling every single cop a bad cop, but at a really, really, really disproportionate rate, it's seemingly that the young African-American men always end up on the wrong side of the bullet. And so for us have seen that. It goes, I can either sit here, that his running away is the somebody else's version of don't touch the stove. That's all it is. And I think that's what gets missed. And I think that's where I get fired up, if you can't tell, because it's there. When I was 8 years old, same street that this incident occurred with this young lady, I had a toy gun. I was 8 years old, toy gun with an orange tip, bought from Walgreens, I believe, or Big Lots, little cowboy gun that they still make today, brown handle, shiny metallic wrap. I have it out in the middle of the street. I'm like 8 years old. A cop from a quarter of a mile away, maybe 4/10 of a mile away, comes zooming down the street and tells me that I need to be careful where I point that gun because I might get killed. I'm 8 years old with a cowboy gun with an orange tip, which is there specifically so you know that this, if it didn't give away that I'm only 4 foot tall, 4'8", or whatever the case may be, if that didn't give it away that I'm a child, if maybe it was a lack of puberty in my voice, if that didn't give it away, if maybe, just maybe, you didn't recognize that I was playing with somebody else who didn't have a lick of facial hair on them or whose voice wasn't deep. There's only, to me, and this is my traumatic experience, there's only one reason for that cop to come zooming down the street, because he assumed this little black boy had a gun. Now, somebody could say, oh, you being crazy, whatever would happen. You could say that. And then you're more than welcome to feel that, but you ain't me. That's not your experience, it's mine. So how are you going to tell me about mine? And then subsequent experiences after that have confirmed that. So incidents with Mr. Brooks like that, I think, again, to Michael's point, which is a great point, is that the only reaction we have right now at times outside of fighting back is to do our best to go into protective and safe mode to prevent. And is it always the right thing to do? No. Nobody says that. We don't. But if I told you you got to make a life or death decision only because that's what we feel that we're in, not because I am passing that on every single cop. But if I'm telling you that we have to make a life or death decision, what would you do? Because that's what our trauma has taught us that this encounter is, a life or death decision. I think he raised a great point. And something like that is where people miss the buck. They really do. Because I'm not one to sit here and cast every cop as a bad cop. My aunt was a sergeant for the Cincinnati Police Department. I'm really great friends with other police. Hell, I took my kids, student athletes, last year to the Cincinnati Police Academy to have dialogue and interaction with cops. I'm not that guy. I know there are great people. But our experience has told us that more times than not, whether it's sensationalized by the media or if it's not, more times than not, we end up on the wrong side of the bullet. And that trauma has been passed down over generations to say, well, just don't fight it. And we got two options, fight or flight. That's it. And unfortunately, we've seen both sides end up on the wrong side of the building, both fight and flight. So what are we to do? Sorry. What are we to do?
Okay, so Greg, you have a son, and Michael, you have two daughters, and I'm going to go back to you, Michael. How do you coach your daughters so that when they're hanging with black young men, when they become teenagers, so that they're not on the wrong side of the bullet by association? And how do you view the police? And all of us know all police officers are not bad, but there is a systemic culture that's not good. So, Mike, why don't you share with us your perspective?
Yeah, and as I think about that question, I'd be interested to hear, how chiefs, sergeants, captains of police departments would answer that question, because the reality is that people of color have been tasked with teaching white people for decades. And so at what point is there going to be an opportunity for them to engage their own discomfort and to step out of potentially their own comfort zone to ensure that people of color don't need to have those conversations with their young child? And because that is where mental health and generational trauma emerges, by the fact that I need to consider having conversations with my 7-year-old, with my 5-year-old, about things that should not be burdensome to them at such a young age. And so it's a structure of oppression and it's a structure of mental health. So how do you come out from underneath that rock and carrying that weight at such a young age? And then each microaggression thereafter. My girls, they attend based on the neighborhood, they attend a school that doesn't really look like them. And so then they say, well, my hair, why is my hair curly and my friend's hair is straight? Why do I have tan or brown or black skin and my friends don't have? And then I need to tell them, oh, by the way, because of your skin, you need to be mindful of this, and see how, and when their frontal lobe hasn't developed to be able to quantify or to even unpack what that even means. And so the only means that they have to understand it is to say that I'm not good enough. Again, and I go back to that, I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. But yet we're supposed to be as successful. We go to school, and education is to be the great equalizer. But as we step in the doors, there's been oppression inside the educational system, the pipeline to prison and so forth. So I know this isn't the answer to your question, Craig, but I would really be interested as to what are the steps, because no matter how much teaching I do, if the people who have the opportunity to impact and make meaningful decisions about how they choose to interact with people of color, my teaching isn't going to make one bit of difference.
Michael, you have an uncanny ability to bring up 10 relevant issues to every one I ask you about. And it just, you're bringing up things I've never, ever thought about. So something that comes to my mind is that I've been in situations in my life where I felt inferior, but most of the time in my life I felt adequate. And I think we've created a system and a culture where people of color could have generational inferiority complexes. And that's what you kind of described with your daughters, the situation they may be dealing with as life unfolds, and they learn more and more about the history and learn more about what they can't, shouldn't, or should do in society. And that blows my mind. Thoughts from you, Greg?
I agree with everything that he's saying, because we have to, in society, and I actually feel this, we're the only people that got to explain who we are. The only ones. The only people who have to explain who we are. And what's the relevant example? There are other people of color here. Have we ever had to explain to you why we need Cinco de Mayo? Tell me. When the true heritage, the people who truly are from that heritage and that culture don't even celebrate it as such. But has anybody ever had to explain why we needed Cinco de Mayo? Even though it's not a real holiday, but Cinco de Mayo is on the same calendar that Juneteenth is. But we got to explain it. Why? We're the only people that got to walk into a room and announce that, listen, this is what happened to us. Whether it be understood or known from another culture, we're the only culture that has to walk into a room and say, explain. Tell me why. Why? The only people who have to do that. Nobody else is. Everybody else just shows up and it's like, all right, I understand either your plight or your oppression. I understand that your privilege, whatever the case may be, and that's that. The only culture that has to show up and explain and announce ourselves with everything. And then we are also the only culture, and this is my opinion, maybe I won't say only, but more than the next at a significant level, where we have to explain to each other that you're not the problem. You're not the issue. He shouldn't have to have that conversation with his daughter. I shouldn't have to explain to this kid in 8th grade who the first time he heard me speak asked me, why do you talk like that? I'm the only person that we're the only culture that has to explain that. Because and I could be wrong, but I'll take this shot in the dark. Lehan, have you ever walked into a person out of color and asked them why they spoke that way?
No, in fact, no, not at all. Not at all. In fact, we get it. Wow, you're so articulate. Well,
exactly.
What's your standard?
That's my point. We're the only, in everything that we do, we have to explain it. Why are y'all so angry? Okay, all right, got it. All right. Why do you feel oppressed? Why do you feel like you were? Why do you need? Can you tell me how? Go to this. I'll even make it relevant to Lehan. Oh my gosh. How do you get your hair like that for his baby daughters? How do you get your hair to do that? We're the only people that have to explain, and that does something to you because now it goes to his point. I said, as he was speaking, I'm like, I'm gonna create an organization called NWY, okay, NWWY. There's nothing wrong with you, okay, NWY, right? And I got a cousin who makes shirts, and I was gonna have him make a shirt that says, "There's nothing wrong. You're black. Period." That's because we shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't, and I think, unfortunately, that's what it is. Is that the question mark has always been raised around us, and I think it goes much deeper. It's because we have been separated and we have been talked down to, and we have been put in a position of, if you will, inferiority, right? That leads people by people who wanted to have us there. Go back to Michael's point. That trauma over time now leads to people that trauma, and then that learning from people on the other side, from the oppressors, that comfort with it has led us to say, why do we have to explain, and led other people to continue to believe and to continue to try to suppress and oppress and say, I don't see what the big deal is because you really shouldn't even be here. I think that those are my thoughts regarding this kind of inferiority complex. It's because it has been for a while, and why it has started with people who truly wanted to do it. It has been passed down through generations. It has been permeated through the doggone media. And I ain't saying, I mean media just in general, both in imagery and in print alike. And I think that for us, you look up and you look around and you see so much progress and still see so much further to go and go, goodness gracious, all you want is a change. I'll give you a perfect example, Craig and Michael. You won't believe this stuff here. I promise you, you won't believe this. I'm out of town, Father's Day. Son's down for a nap. I go to the bookstore, and this town is a predominantly white town. Who cares? I go to the bookstore in this predominantly white town, and I go to the history section, world history section. I started to take a video of it. I didn't because I didn't want to put this resume. There was one book by a black author about black history. One. In a bookstore. And this wasn't your mom and pop bookstore. No. This is a really, really decent sized bookstore. I should say decent sized bookstore. Sliding doors at the front. Those aren't our mom and pop shops. In the world history section. Because I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go and I'm going to see what I can find. I just want to see what I can find. I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to read it. Because I'm going to continue to educate myself on history. Not one. And people wonder why we feel inferior. Because it is systemic that we've been told that you really don't matter. This was just last week, Craig, Mike. This was just last week. The world history section. Not one book, especially given the times. I can understand if Mr. Floyd was killed yesterday. I can understand if he was killed 2 days ago. If all these things hadn't happened, you would think that there would be some type of trigger that will go off, and whether it be biased or not, who cares? At least on the surface, to me, it seems like you give a damn, but you clearly don't. You would think they say, man, you know what? We got to push these out. We should. We got to flip this, because there may be more people wanting to come read. Let's flip this. Just one in the entire history section. Go to relevant events. Nothing. The relevant event section. That's why we feel inferior, Craig. We ain't making this shit up. That's what pisses me off the most about anything. Is not the people who say, well, you shouldn't, To be quite honest with you, I think those people are set in their ways, and we can't have a discussion with them anyway. And I think Lehan would agree. He is very intelligent. We can recognize those people quickly. The ones who you can talk to them for 13, 14, 15, 20 years, and that's not going to change. Anybody who really is aware, we see those people quickly. It's the people who say, well, you don't really need that, do you? Is it really that big of a deal? Those are the ones who piss off, because those are the ones who truly perpetuate this inferiority complex, or this kind of for them, they've gotten comfortable with this superiority.
What you're talking about is there's critical race theory, and there's one of the tenets it's called whiteness as property, and that is where the superiority complex really comes in. Critical race theory, whiteness as property. is one of the tenets that really talks about that notion of being superior and so forth. And the other thing, as I was listening, that the challenging piece is, how you feel inferior is because even if you excel and do well and get a job that you're incredibly qualified for, then you're discounted by saying, well, it's just affirmative action. They only got this job based on affirmative action. So at what point does affirmation ever come for people of color? At what point does it ever come for Black people when they achieve and they excel beyond statistically what people think they should? Then it's discounted and cast aside due to affirmative action.
Couldn't agree more. You never win. Lose-lose.
It is lose-lose. Okay, so I want to just kind of take a short piece of history that took place 47 years ago. And that's when Martin Luther King was at the Lincoln Memorial and he gave his I Have a Dream speech. And I read that speech last week, and he talks in there on 2 occasions about police oppression and brutality. And here we are in 2020, 47 years later, and it might be worse, or it may be just reported more because of video. But what do you, like, you guys are younger than 47, what do you think honestly has changed since MLK gave his speech? And what, maybe more importantly, what still needs to change? Because that's probably where we should be focusing.
I'll let you swing, Lehan.
So it's my belief that our society is built on systems. The criminal justice system, the school systems, healthcare, governmental policy, practice. And you tell me which of those systems have had an overhaul since then. And if the answer is none, therein lies your answer to the question. So I don't believe that there's been a heck of a lot that's changed. And systems always have a means to adjust themselves. Some people, and I don't want to get into politics, but some people would suggest that when Obama was elected, we were living in a post-racial America for 8 years. And if our society is a system and our government is a system, now we have somebody in office who has only reminded us the vast perspectives that rest within this country. So as we look at, in order to, and you have to be a system thinker in order to really discern to the extent how change has happened and what change looks like. And so there's something that's called the iceberg thinking model. And you look at events. What are the events that have happened? You look at patterns and trends, and that's where history is going to come in over time. What are the patterns of trends? How have people been treated? How have people been othered? How have people been marginalized? Who has a voice at the table? And even that notion of having a voice at the table would suggest ownership of whose table it is. Then you think about structures. What sort of structures are in place? That's where you think about war on drugs. That's where you think about redlining. That's where you think who has people making a big thing about all these rights. They're burning down all these buildings. Guess what? They have insurance. And I guarantee you, anybody that I've talked to, I've said, I guarantee you this is an opportunity for gentrification within the areas of which has been harmed by the riots. It's going to be gentrified. In 3 to 5 years, let's take a visit, and I guarantee you I will be right. And then the mental models. So we think about events, patterns and trends, structures, mental models. What are the inherent beliefs that people hold? And so once you work your way down this thinking model, therein lies your answer. People's hearts and minds need to be changed. They need to be influenced. And if those people who have been influenced don't have a seat at the table to bring about some structural change is not going to happen. Change is because systems will always have a means and a way to reinvent, to pivot, and they're nimble enough to perpetuate the outcomes they want and tend to construct.
I couldn't have said it better.
That was unbelievable. Michael, you said it's hearts that need to change. The systems don't change unless the hearts change.
Do I believe it starts with the heart? And do I believe that the heart has been shaped and molded by somebody who died before us and for us? Absolutely. But you can make the argument that that's crazy. And if you are one of those people who want to make the argument that that's crazy, then change starts right where Lehan eloquently explained. That's where it begins. If you don't believe that, it starts with the heart. So I could make that argument. I had this quote from this guy the other day, and isn't it crazy? This is the quote. Isn't it crazy that all this time we still feel this way? That after all this time we still have discrimination and segregation? That after all this time we still are poor, broke, and marginalized amongst all of this prosperity? Isn't it sad that after all this time, we still feel like we don't even belong or are wanted here? That is a depiction of today, right? I think you both would agree with that kind of statement.
Yes.
Right? Okay. You want to know what's even more crazy? Is that I didn't hear that quote. I just used Martin Luther King's words and put them into modern language. I literally just read straight from the speech. 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, after all this time, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lies on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, we are still languished. Now, if you change 100 to 147, tell me what's different, Craig. That's my answer to your question. We have made strides, and I won't lie to you. But what's more crazy about the fact that I read that I told you all that, and I said I paraphrased that and said, isn't that crazy? And not one of you batted an eye to think that this was from a speech in 1963. It just gives you your answer. There are notable and visible changes. I'm not one of those people to turn a blind eye to the progression that we have made. Considering the fact that not too long before this decision, after, don't mind me on my history, that Michael Lehan wasn't even allowed to be in the same school as a person that wasn't as a white person. So I'm not one to ignore the progressions that we have made, but I'm also not one to sit here and pat some people on the back because we still got a long way to go. And the fact that I just paraphrased that statement, right? That I just paraphrased that, giving you all the context that this came from a guy a couple of days ago, and nobody better than I to say that is extreme. And I'd love to know if anybody listening to this podcast, when they first heard that, think back to that 30 seconds ago, how you felt, that you didn't bat an eye, that you didn't think that was outlandish, that you didn't think I was sensationalizing something. The fact that you didn't feel that way answers your question as to, do you think there has been change made? You would think 50 years that there'd be something, that this statement, there would be something in that particular statement that didn't ring true. And unfortunately, it does.
Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I echo what has been shared. That there's there have been advances, but incremental. And another tenet from critical race theory is interest convergence. And interest convergence is really what you see at, well, for lack of a better example, at the collegiate experience when somebody gets a scholarship. I am going to recruit a player. They are going to play for me. If they become a great collegiate player, there's going to be a heck of a lot more people that pay ticket prices to come to see them play, and maybe they become an All-American. And then all I have to pay is potentially $90,000 to $100,000, whatever it costs for their 4-year degree. Maybe it's more than that. Who knows? But I also understand the structures of society. So from a capitalist perspective, my investment on somebody from Hopkins, Minnesota, that's a 3-star athlete, if they come to the University of Minnesota, maybe they'll be successful, maybe they won't, maybe they'll earn their degrees, maybe they'll fail out of school. Football is in the fall, so if I can get them for maybe 2 seasons before they fail out or they go to the league, but there's more people that came and bought tickets to watch them play, so you know what? We've made a benefit. So the notion of interest convergence is the fact that incremental advancement that people of color can make is not going to overthrow the establishment. So every single advancement is measured by those of whom that can determine access and opportunity. And so the advancements that have been made, I have to believe, are advancements that have been well vetted and strategically placed to appear as if we're in a post-racial America, to appear as if places are inclusive and responsive, to appear as if we want to be anti-racial leaders and so forth. So, and I don't mean to sound if, and to minimize some more aggressive advancement that's happening and so on and so forth, because I believe that it is. But I don't also want people to rest on their laurels to suggest that, we're doing these people a favor, because the reality is that trauma is still real. The reality is that I still see people crossing the other side of the street when I'm walking down the block, that I still see people locking their car doors, and that I still feel like I need to minimize myself. And I'm not as big or as muscular as Greg, but that I still need to minimize myself and shrink my shoulders when I go into different audiences, so I don't appear to offend or impose people. And so these are just conditions that still have to operate by today. And to your question earlier, Craig, is the fact that, so what sort of lessons need to be taught around how to stay safe and not be on the wrong side of a bullet in 2020? And so, these are all true. So there is a fierce urgency to be able to be courageous, to be able to step out. And one thing that I saw on social media, they talked about, I hope that the activism around George Floyd was not in vain, that it didn't just turn out to be a Black Lives Matter Spirit Week or Spirit Month, that we need to have endurance, that it needs to last, and that the inequities need to be called upon, and there needs to be substantial change in order for our society to thrive to the extent that it's capable of.
Yeah, and I think Craig, and as I was listening to Lehan talk, I think I had two thoughts. I might not get to the second one because it just slipped my mind. But the first one is this: you want to see real change. I think the greatest measurement of change is when you start to see the advancements made, increment or not, when they are proactive advancements, not reactive. Because everything that we've gotten to this point has been reactive, right, to something. Right, and you can go back through history, and any change has been reactive. So I believe the greatest measurement of change is when we start to see these people or these people, whomever those people are, if the shoe fits, wear it, God dog it, right? These people say, hey, this is wrong. This is what needs to be better. This is what we will do to be better. I think that is, in the simplest form, what Michael has alluded to in my interpretation of it. Is that it's been these things that have kind of been done to say, here you go, right? You're pissed off? Don't get mad at us. So we promise. Don't be mad at us. We promise. Okay? We got you. It's never been somebody sitting at a table or in a boardroom or whatever, in my opinion, and there has been real, true change. Okay? There's never been anybody that I can remember where it was like, this is terribly wrong, and this is why we are doing this, to make this happen. So I think that's the greatest measure when you know real change, is when people start being proactive and not reactive with policies and reforms and such.
Okay, being a white man, I'm asking you guys, what do white people totally miss the point on? And you've communicated several things today, but if you could just narrow it down to one or two things.
Have you seen that video of that lady, Kimberly Jones? It's a black lady, and this is all I got for that, because I think it's hard to boil down to one. But she placed it perfectly when she said this: "Y'all should be lucky. Y'all should be lucky. We just want equality, not revenge. We're not trying to fight you. That's it. People miss the buck. We just want equality." And within that statement, you find the people who say, "Well, why don't you have it? You had a black president. Why don't you have it? You got David Stewart, who's a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. You got Robert Smith, right? You have Oprah Winfrey, who's not only black, but she's a woman. What do you mean you don't have equality? They did it. Why can't you?" That lies within that realm. But I think the simple part that's missed is we just want equality, not revenge, period. I think that's where most people miss it. And if you don't believe that there is no inequality, that there is no disparities, if you don't believe that, then and you're not willing to at least listen to why, I'm sure Mike's talked to several people. Craig, I'm sure you have. I've talked to several influential people who literally have said, I never knew. I don't sit in this circle, but you're a trusted friend, and I appreciate you telling me these types of things. If you're not willing to listen, to educate yourself, to understand, then you're a part of the problem. And that's where you're missing the book. Just equality, not revenge.
How about you, Michael?
I think it's a point of reflection, individualized reflection, because we know that when people tell somebody to do something, they obviously don't. So it really needs to be inherent. It needs to be personal reflection. And the reflection is really around how have you constructed your worldview? What experiences have you engaged in that has helped you engage multiple perspectives? How frequently have you sat in a place of discomfort, in a place of learning? And if you have not had discomfort and you're often in a place of comfort, you're not really ready to learn, because rights have never been civil to me. Just the fact that we need to be heard, need to have a place, need to be valued, and so I think it's an individualized point of reflection about how frequently have I been in a place of comfort. I don't know what comfort is, because I spend more time thinking about how I'm being received in different places than that of truly enjoying my time. And how have we let social media construct our reality? One thing up here is that you'll see how many people have been arrested for looting or arson. Primarily, it's been white folks, but in the news would tell you that it's 100% black folks and people of color. So where are we getting our information, and are we certain that the information is accurate? It's more about just being ready and positioning oneself as a learner and being reflective about how their world has become constructed.
Gentlemen, you guys were both unbelievably candid, informative, honest. But if there's anything else you would like to say, go for it, and then we'll wrap this up.
I'm good, Craig. I'm good. I appreciate you. I do. I appreciate you. I appreciate the people who want to have the conversation. But other than that, I think more people in this world need to lead with love. First and foremost, follow up with a listen. That's all I got. Try to throw out a bunch of solutions and things like that. I think now it just takes a lot more time than just sitting here with you two and giving some parting words. But what will always carry, both now and forever, and has carried, is lead with love and then follow up with a listen.
Yeah, and I would to even echo that and build on that would just be that ultimately one's charge needs to be caretakers of the human spirit. And if you are aware of what your human spirit needs and you're mindful of what others might need, naturally we're going to make this a better place. And certainly to that notion of leading with love and follow up with a listen, obviously take up the charge and assume the disposition of a caretaker of the human spirit.
In the words of Martin Luther King in his I Have a Dream speech, which is an unbelievable piece of art, he talks about we can never be satisfied as long as. And we can never be satisfied as long as we don't have equality. People don't realize that God made us all in his image, regardless of the color of our eyes, the color of our hair, or the color of our skin.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have an awesome day. Thank you so much. You guys are both smart as hell. I really appreciate your hearts. I appreciate your minds, and I appreciate your friendships.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks, Michael. I learned something.
Yeah, thank you both.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can follow us on our website, promindsetpodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.
Now that you've taken on that big job, you shouldn't have to settle for the big box. You've earned a trip to Northern Tool, and we're ready for the details. We know all about the little things that make the biggest difference. Maybe that's why they call us a problem solver's paradise. From pressure washers to power tools, pallet jacks to push carts, Northern Tool and Equipment carries the brands you depend on, like North Star, DeWalt, Milwaukee, and Strongway. We're made for this. Come see us in store or shop online at northerntool.com.
Some people might say coffee doesn't need chocolate, but you're not some people. You're a dreamer. You see the possibilities of chocolate and caramel flavors swirling together with cold brew, topped with velvety chocolate cold foam and cocoa caramel crumbles. That imagination can only be rewarded with Dunkin's new caramel chocolate cold brew. It's a cold brew dream come true. America runs on Dunkin'. Price and participation may vary. Limited time offer. Terms apply.